If you listen carefully, at the end, you'll be someone else. The wind relentlessly howled, its mournful cry echoing through the frozen landscape. To Daniel, it appeared as if the wind was singing a triumphant melody, mercilessly flinging clumps of frozen snow and shards of ice at anything that stood in its path, him included. He had seen countless strange things on this trip, and the wind's malevolent presence fitted it perfectly. It was out to kill them. Daniel had been excited and proud when learned he had been assigned to HMS Erebus and would be joining the adventure to find the elusive Northwest Passage through the Arctic. His name would be recorded in history as part of the expedition that, in 1845, departed from England as the King's Explorers of the unknown Canadian Arctic captained by the famous Sir John Franklin. The rope wound around Daniel's waist, went taut in front, almost pulling him over. He pushed against the piece of ship's wood he was using as a snow pole, managing to keep his balance. He tugged twice on the rope, no response. The rope line running from his back went loose as the man behind, unaware of the situation, continued walking. Daniel tugged 3 times to warn him and continued to trudge forward. What had begun as a group of 43 men had now dwindled to 32. At least 10 had perished due to hunger, illness, or simply gone, disappeared. The wind's howl would create a whirring dervish, and one of the crew would simply vanish without a trace. One moment here, the next gone, and the wind's speed and howl would slow and quieten a little, becoming less intense. It was as if the body had been swallowed and satiated some appetite, temporarily. The expedition's last surviving men were tied together in a line with only 12 feet between them. In this storm, you couldn't see the man in front of you, let alone anything else around. Daniel almost fell again as his feet hit up against something, a dark shape he could just make out on the ground. He nudged it hard with one foot. It didn't move. Fearing the worst, he leaned on his stick and bent down to shake the lump. Again, no response. With a struggle, Daniel got to his knees and rolled the body onto its back. It was Francis, the man next to him in the line. He pulled Francis' face coverings down, peeling off some skin that had frozen to the fabric. He couldn't see any air coming out from his mouth, so he bent down to listen and feel if there was any breath. Both of them were too well wrapped up to feel any chest movement. Daniel got close to Francis' face. Suddenly, wild eyes sprung open and intricate tattoos manifested across Francis's cheeks. Unexpectedly, Francis lunged forward, teeth bared, and aimed for his throat. Daniel fell back, landing in the snow. Francis rolled onto him in a frenzy, tearing at coverings and clothes, trying to reach Daniel's throat. His hands contorted, morphing into gnarled, claw-like fingers with long, sharp, thick, and black nails. He gripped the sides of Daniel's chest and reared up, his face altering, mouth and nose becoming one long snout, growing to accommodate a double row of fangs, foul slime dripping, eyes enlarging, yet narrowing, pupils glowing red and angry. Daniel reached down to his belt and pulled out his ice pick. Using the flat side wouldn't help, so he swung with all his might and buried the sharp end of the pick into Francis' skull. The wind howled, several pitches higher than usual, much like a scream. Francis' face seemed to melt, shifting back to its original form. Eyes, nose, and mouth reverted to normal, and he went limp and heavy upon Daniel. A shadow appeared from behind, George, the crewman tied to Daniel's back. He rolled the corpse off and tried to talk to Daniel. The wind laughed as it ripped the words from George's mouth and threw them into a darker, larger shadow floating at Daniel's feet. The shadow rolled into the rapid flow of air and swirled away to join the whiteout. More shadows loomed out of the whiteness as the message, which had literally traveled down the line linking them all together, indicated a problem. Daniel removed his ice pick and wiped it in the snow, removing the blood, and returned it to his belt. There would be no discussions. No one would dare to risk removing their face coverings. And to what point? In the midst of the raging storm, no sound could be heard anyway, with all ears well covered and the unrelenting howl of the wind. Daniel had initially been glad to join the group that decided to abandon their ship. Harsh as their current circumstances were, it had started better than life on the ship in the last months. Crew members were vanishing, things started moving around unexplainably, and the ice squeezing the ship produced cracking and thumping noises. Or, at least Daniel hoped the ice was the cause of such noises. All the while, men were dying of hunger or unknown illness, with others happy using their fallen comrades as food. The situation had pushed Daniel and the few remaining rational crew members to the brink of insanity. The once comfortable, normal ship had turned into a madhouse, with no end in sight as the wind invaded the ship's interior. Its insane howling rushed wild through the cabins, the holds, and the decks. Daniel felt it had a life of its own, or was being driven by someone or something unseen. The ice caught both ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, for a second time, and wouldn't let go for 2 years. The river didn't thaw as it should have. Between the cold, hunger, howling wind, and disappearing men, Daniel couldn't get off the ship quick enough. But until now, the wind had seemed to follow them, howling and seemingly creating the storm. And now Francis' mutation. Maybe I'm going mad too, Daniel thought. George helped Daniel untie Francis, and then to strip his body of the load he had carried, passing the big items back down the line to be placed in the sole remaining boat they dragged behind them. They had taken several lifeboats to carry all the last remnants of provisions salvaged from the ships, leaving them behind one by one as the cargo was used. Now only one boat remained. All the animals that had been brought on the ships had been eaten long ago. Now, they lamented not keeping some to carry the cargo, but no one had expected the ships to be ice-imprisoned for so long. No one could have anticipated the desperate need to abandon their vessels and traverse this frozen white desert in search of survival. After removing Francis' backpacks and emptying his pockets, his lifeless body was also passed back down the line. Any corpse was loaded into the boat, hopefully, Daniel believed, to be returned home for a proper burial. Unfortunately, more often than not, these bodies end up for grabs to anyone willing to try to alleviate their unbearable hunger. Many of the crew could not stomach the thought and had already perished. Some had been able to strip the dead, let the body freeze, then break off parts and cook them in a pot. Gruesome, yet necessary. With everything he had been through, Daniel's brain could no longer handle more than each present moment as it happened, each step he took. As more men approached, Daniel handed out the leftover items from France's backpacks. They were taken silently, and when the backpacks were empty, the men went back to their place in line, back to their walk across the sea ice, to the Canadian mainland, all putting their faith in Captain Crozier and his statement, "I know which way to go, follow me, men." After what felt like an eternity, the storm subsided, clearing the view. Daniel surveyed the white, desolate, endless plain around them. Endless, except, and he had to blink several times to be certain, further ahead, the unmistakable sweep of a riverbank. Infinite white landscape broken by a gentle, curving line. Had they finally reached the back river? If so, it looked bleak and empty with no sign of civilization. They had expected to at least see buildings, tents, or some structures indicating some kind of settlement. Daniel had seen people along the walk, he was sure. He had forced himself to believe those rare shadows he saw were human. They had kept their distance and soon disappeared. Did people actually live here? Could there be an indigenous population? It was the first Daniel had ever heard of it. Yet why had they not approached to investigate the intruders? Perhaps those apparitions were nothing more than hallucinations, tricks played by a fatigued body, mind, and soul. He stumbled forward, excited by the possibility of making it to their goal and maybe finding these people. Many of the rest of the men also started to speed up the pace. He felt encouraged, and he wasn't the only one believing they had made it. Yet the initial excitement started to fade as distance took its toll and the line of men slowed again to a trudge. Eventually, they made it to the banks of the river and stood watching the flow of water and ice in awe. Finally, a sign of life they all understood. They decided to set up a camp. Daylight in the Arctic lasted only a few hours at this time of year. And when the light is gone, the cold darkness penetrates the bones. Daniel quietly counted how many men were left. 31 bodies were still moving and helping to camp. 4 lay still and frozen in the boat. He felt sick to his empty stomach, imagining the reason those bodies were still with the group. Someone built a fire pit and managed to start a fire using clothes from the dead bodies and some of the last gunpowder. A pot was brought out from the boat and was placed on the fire. Daniel could watch no more. He sat on one of the camp stools and turned it so he could follow the flow of the river with his eyes below the frozen surface. Lost in the flow and the swirl of the ice and water, his mind drifted. He lost track of time, his surroundings, and himself. After some time, someone kicked Daniel's leg, causing him to open his eyes. He hadn't even realized he had closed them. The man who had kicked him looked Daniel deep in the eyes, then offered him a charred stump of meat. Daniel shook his head. He can't remember when he last ate. His stomach was so empty for so long that it had stopped complaining. The man persisted, shaking the meat at him again and nodding encouragingly. Daniel shook his head once again and averted his gaze. The man shrugged and moved on. The wind rose again, and with it the cruel howling. The storm was returning. To the side of the camp, a lump of snow slowly rose up. Daniel watched as a massive creature shook itself, exposing white fur. The monster charged at one of the men, stopped in front of him, and rose up taller than a man as it stood on its hind legs. It opened a jaw, bearing long teeth and a red tongue. Daniel was sure he could hear a roar, even through all his protective clothing. It fell back onto all four legs and ran straight at the man. Before he had time to react, it barreled into him, huge talon-like claws grasping his side, ripping through his clothes. Daniel saw the massive teeth bite into the man's throat and the claws rip his chest open as the creature gorged on the body. Men sprang into action, grabbing harpoons from the boat. A few charged the creature while it ate, sinking the harpoons deep into its body. It raised its head, stood again, and roared. Then, grabbing the body, it turned and ran off into the frozen wasteland. Men sank to the ground, exhausted and in shock, their tired brains trying to put together what was happening as daylight started to fade. The dark closed in fast, faster than normal, it seemed. The wind continued howling, rising in intensity. Daniel watched the river until he could no longer see the flow or the ice moving, and all had disappeared in complete darkness. Above the wind's howl, deep growls and roars arose from nowhere. Daniel turned towards the only light left, the campfire. Men were gathering, huddling around the weak light and heat it gave off. Abruptly, the wind ceased and the roars vanished. Silence fell. A complete and utter absence of sound, surreal and unnerving, as if the time itself had momentarily paused. It seemed like a break given by God, an opportunity for the men to pray for forgiveness. The men looked around, peering into the dark, trying to see the unseen. As quickly as they had ceased, the terrifying sounds surged back with even greater intensity. The howling intensified to an ear-piercing pitch, while the deeper growls and roars formed a menacing bass. Massive, dark shadows materialized out of the night, intermittently illuminated by the flickering firelight. Panic gripped the men, causing some to dart off in random directions in a futile attempt to escape. Others remained rooted in the spot, paralyzed in sheer terror. One shadow swiftly closed in on the fire, revealing a monster that seized a man before retreating into the enveloping darkness. Immediately, another shadow approached the fire, snatching another man before vanishing into obscurity. No way to resist, no hope of salvation. The men stood frozen beside the fire, helpless witnesses as they were being plucked away, one by one. It was all too much for Daniel. He wearily closed his eyes, succumbing to the weight of exhaustion. A long time later, Daniel awoke with light flickering through his eyelids. He opened his eyes briefly. All seemed quiet, too quiet and empty. Out of the corner of his eyes, a shadow loomed. It looked human this time, like a man holding a plank of wood. The man threw something into the air and, using the wood like a bat, hit it into the river, breaking the surface underneath where Daniel was now lying. Daniel turned to watch the ripples where the object broke through as the river, now flowing, started to wash away the snow beneath him. He felt his wife come and sit beside him, even though he didn't understand how, and his brain was too tired to try and think it through. He leaned against her chest, as he often did on an evening in front of the fire at home, and closed his eyes. She caressed his head and his hair. Funny, he thought. Where are my coverings? Quietly, gently, as the swift river swallowed the snow below him, and he slid quietly into the freezing water. His wife helped him to stand and led him towards a light. He followed, holding her hand, and the light washed over him. He never needed to open his eyes again.